War. War never changes.
Some kind of war junkie?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Welcome to the War 102 podcast, where we explore the doctrine, theory, philosophy, and history of warfare. I'm your guide, Paul Darling, and I want to share what I learned in nearly 30 years in uniform. So let's get to learning about the most influential activity in human history, war. Welcome to episode 82. Why can't the U.S. Navy build ships anymore? And you thought Waterloo would be next. Well, that was the idea. Before we dive into the why we aren't doing Waterloo quite yet, some housekeeping and announcements. You may remember news of the real plastic heroes, toy soldiers, in an earlier episode. Well, they are available for purchase now, and they are amazingly nice. They are designed and manufactured entirely in the United States and make a great toy for any kid who needs to get off his electronic devices, regardless of that child's age. I do receive a small part of all profits from any sales in full disclosure. Please check them out at realplasticheroes.com and get your orders if you are interested. They will be delivered well before Christmas. Thanks. Now, on to our latest episode. And tragically, this week, 2 guardsmen were attacked and killed by an Afghan refugee brought in during the chaos following the fall of Kabul. They were apparently West Virginia guardsmen. I reiterate again that Washington, D.C. does not need guardsmen to conduct law enforcement. And more to the point, it doesn't appear that these guardsmen were conducting any law enforcement. They were conducting security guard duties. And traditionally, while carrying service weapons, they are rarely issued ammunition. I'm not sure if the 2 who were attacked had weapons and or ammunition, but I suspect they did not have both. It is both insulting and dangerous that while all too happy to force guardsmen with real jobs to leave and basically act as mall security, these politicians don't trust these same guardsmen to have the requisite tools to protect themselves. Time and again, our uniformed servicemen have been attacked by terrorists while forced to remain defenseless under penalty of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. We have disarmed the profession of arms. This callous disregard for the safety and professionalism of our so-called professional army must be addressed immediately. If every time a politician needs a symbol of doing something, the National Guard is their first instinct. I've touched twice already on the foolishness and possible illegality of how the National Guard is being used, and has been used previously, so I won't belabor the point. My only hope, and it's a small one, is these tragic and entirely preventable deaths will be a catalyst for much needed change. Also this week, and the focus of this week's episode, I learned that the Navy was canceling the Constellation Class Frigate, a replacement for the littoral combat ship as well as the now extinct Perry Class Frigates. This hits a little close to home for me, surprisingly, as a retired soldier, as over a decade ago I proposed, along with my co-author, then Lieutenant and now Commander Lawler, that the Navy should dump the LCS and buy a foreign-designed frigate manufactured domestically, which is exactly what the Constellation class was supposed to be. The Constellation was known as the FREM, Frigate Européenne Multimission, or Fregata Europea Multimissione. It's a Franco-Italian family of multi-purpose frigates designed by the Naval Group and Fincantieri. The program was established to replace older frigates in both French and Italian navies, with France ordering 8 vessels and Italy planning 10. The lead ship, Aquitaine, was commissioned by the French Navy in November 2012. The FREM is available in different variants tailored to specific missions. France operates 6 anti-submarine variants and 2 anti-air variants, while Italy operates 6 general-purpose variants and 4 anti-submarine warfare variants. The class has also been exported, with Egypt acquiring 2 vessels. The United States Navy had selected a FREM variant for its Constellation Class Frigate, with 20 planned, to be built by Fincantieri. The French FREM had a full load displacement of 6,000 tons and a length of 142 meters. The Italian FREM variant had a greater displacement of 6,700 tons and a slightly longer length of 144 meters. Both variants featured a combined diesel-electric gas propulsion system with a speed exceeding 27 knots for the French version and 30 knots for the Italian. The range is approximately 6,000 nautical miles at 15 knots for both variants. So, it seems like Darling & Company drew up an L, but not exactly. Explicit in our recommendations was to, and I quote, make minimal changes. And here is where our glorious Navy screwed up. They decided to, and no surprise here, make it bigger, adding 600 tons to the already larger Italian design, lengthening and widening the ship, and they ultimately made it too heavy to sail. So you notice the French decided to make her frigates single purpose, with both an anti-submarine variant and air defense variant. The Italians, by virtue of their larger design, went for a multi-purpose, or general purpose, as well as a dedicated anti-submarine hull. The U.S. Navy loves multi-purpose ships, and for good reason. One ship can handle any mission. And going back to my earlier base assumptions, a multi-purpose ship is inherently more expensive. But let's get to some more basic training as we discuss the different types of ships. What differentiates a frigate, a corvette, a coastal patrol boat, a cutter, a destroyer, a cruiser, even the different types of aircraft carriers. These things seem confusing. Good. They are confusing. And in many ways, the various types of ships are arbitrary in their naming and based more on political considerations more than any specific definition. But since we started with news of the frigate, let's begin there. And well, we should. For the frigate was the first ship designed specifically for our new Navy. In 1794, in response to incessant violence against our merchant ships in the Mediterranean by the Muslim Barbary pirates in the previous decade, 6 frigates were commissioned to be built. One of these, the USS Constitution, affectionately known as Old Ironsides, still exists today and is the oldest warship in the world still afloat. HMS Victory, while older, can no longer float. The design of the American frigates prioritized speed, with just enough firepower to overwhelm enemy frigates, which would be traditionally much lighter in armament and wooden armor, while having the speed to evade the heavier dreadnoughts and ships of the line, which we lacked the fleet size to attempt to confront directly. Even before Corbett wrote of sea control, the U.S. Navy was looking in that direction by necessity. In the greater sense, while the Constitution Class frigates were the largest ships of the U.S. Navy, frigates have always been equated to fast, lightly armed ships capable of independent blue water operations for scouting or merchant escort and combining with other ships as required. They are traditionally the smallest ship capable of sailing the open oceans for prolonged periods by themselves, which is why for the U.S. Navy they have always been generally the smallest ship procured, eschewing the smaller corvettes and coastal patrol boats designed more for littoral, that is near the shore patrolling, used to defend the coasts. We are fortunate as a nation that our shores have almost never been at risk from enemy navies. The independent nature of the frigate's mission has lent it an air of romanticism, particularly during the age of sail as opposed to the heavier ships which sailed in mass, awaiting the grand battle royale in the later vision of Mahan. The frigate's meaning and definition became confused during the technological advances of World War II and the immediate post-war era. Suddenly, air defense, submarine warfare, and guided missiles became the priority, versus the massing of the big guns from the ships of the line. The frigate, always considered somewhat a Swiss Army knife of warships, was pressed into these roles by default, and without much consideration to historical norms. So with that, you'll often hear ships described by letters. So let's run down the convention of what these letters represent and how you can decode the letters to understand the ship. This system started in the 1890s, with the battleship USS Indiana being the first one, and so could be called both the USS Indiana as well as B-1. Later, as ship types became more diverse, 2-letter codes were needed. So the single B became BB, meaning battleship, DD was destroyer, SS was a submarine, and FF was a frigate, sometimes called a fast frigate, but that's not why it's an FF. Cruisers had many different types. So a CA would be an armored cruiser or heavy cruiser, a CL would be a light cruiser, and to really blow your mind, the original aircraft carriers were classified as cruisers. So the CV designation is for aviation cruiser, emphasis on the V in aviation. There were no less than 20 different designations for various aircraft carriers in U.S. naval history, but suffice to say that the CVN remains with the N indicating nuclear powered. So after the first 2 letters, you would add on descriptors, which would indicate mission, size, and or means of propulsion. SSN is the nuclear submarine, and SSBN is the nuclear ballistic missile submarine, the N indicating propulsion means and the B indicating ballistic missiles. We also converted, as mentioned earlier in the discussion on our submarine woes, the SSGN, with the G indicating guided missile carrier, as opposed to ballistic missiles. So with that, FFGs would be frigates with guided missiles, a DDG, a destroyer armed with the same, and a CG would be a cruiser with guided missiles. Recall that the repetitive 2 letters were for non-cruiser class ships, as the cruisers had so many variants. So a DDG is a guided missile destroyer, and a CG is a guided missile cruiser. But wait, it gets more confusing. The current, and by current I mean 40-year-old, U.S. Navy cruiser, the Ticonderoga class, was originally designated as a DDG to complement a planned larger cruiser, which was canceled. So the Arleigh Burke destroyer was a slightly smaller version of the Ticonderoga class cruiser, each capable of roughly the same missions. As a surface warfare officer, otherwise known as a SWO, or colloquially a black shoe, nothing to do with French Algerians, a friend of mine explained, the Arleigh Burke destroyer and Ticonderoga cruiser can do the same mission, but a Burke can do two of them at once. A Ticonderoga, or Tico, can do all three at the same time. Overall, we now designate these ships we call surface combatants based on size. A cruiser is bigger than a destroyer, and a destroyer is bigger than a frigate. Without specific training, it is difficult to see the visual difference between the Ticos and Burkes. So to bring it back, the Ticos weigh 9,600 tons. The original Burkes weighed 8,100 tons. But the latest version is now heavier than the Ticos at 9,700 tons. Both have complements of about 330 men and officers and perform the same missions with the same radar and same elements. But one is a cruiser and one is a destroyer. For reasons. Now we're going to make it really bad. As noted, the convention is a destroyer is smaller than a cruiser. But the latest DDG, the Zumwalt class, weighs in at a whopping 15,000 tons, 65% larger than the Tico class cruiser. The Zumwalt was designed specifically to support the Marines and was built around two highly advanced artillery guns, literally called the Advanced Gun Systems. These 155mm guns were to provide highly accurate naval fire supporting an amphibious assault against a defended beach. Like that's going to happen. But the ammunition proved more expensive than guided missiles, and by 2023, the guns were removed and replaced with missiles. The entire ship designed around a gun that doesn't exist anymore. Fortunately, only 3 were made. The Zumwalt class also highlighted a trend in naval shipbuilding affairs: the reduced crew. While the Burkes and Ticos, which might as well be the same ship at this point, as Ticos are being replaced by the latest version of Burkes, with 330 men, the Zumwalt had a crew of less than 150. And while automation is nice, the fact is ships, regardless of the era in which they are constructed, require incessant maintenance, both away and in port. The smaller the crew, the less maintenance that can be performed. And these crew counts reflect an assumption of a casualty-free combat. When a ship is damaged, whether by the sea or by the enemy, damage control is a manpower-intensive effort even with a full complement of men. When wounded or trapped men cannot contribute to this effort, it becomes almost impossible. When the USS Cole, a Burke-class destroyer, was attacked by Al-Qaeda in 2000, the damage control efforts took nearly all the remaining crew to keep her afloat and the fires under control. Over 50 sailors were killed or injured. A similar attack against a far larger ship such as the Zumwalt, but with half the crew, would leave her damage control efforts highly questionable. The 4,000-ton Perry class, which the LCS sought to replace, had the same complement as the nearly 4 times heavier Zumwalt. But the Zumwalt was a piker compared to the LCS when it came to crew size reduction. The LCS, or Littoral Combat Ship, was to be an entirely different kind of ship, designed to fight, literally, in the littorals, yet still remain in theory at least independent blue water capable. While the same tonnage as the Perry, the LCS complement was originally only 40 sailors, later expanded to about 50, which was the most the ship's design could handle. The ships were designed to be exceedingly fast, which has led to numerous issues with both their engines and transmissions. Keep in mind there are 2 different LCS-class ships, each procured concurrently, the Independence class and the Freedom class. Both ships suffer the same overall deficiency in capabilities, but have different specific failures, including premature hull cracking and failure, along with the engine and transmission issues. How much the incredibly small crew and their inability to both man and maintain the ship simultaneously is arguable. The classes, smaller than a frigate, corvettes, and patrol boats, as noted, are not something the U.S. interests themselves in. The Coast Guard cutters could be considered either a frigate or a corvette. The latest edition, the National Security Cutter, is 400 feet long and heavier than an LCS or Perry class at 4,600 tons. Its predecessor, the Hamilton class, was 3,200 tons. Some argued that our frigate replacement should have been NSCs. However, their lack of anti-ship and anti-submarine and anti-air capability would render any redesign effectively an entirely new ship. So what does all this have to do with our latest shipbuilding debacle, the cancellation of the Constellation class? As Mahan taught us, if you can't build ships, you don't possess sea power. The United States was once the world leader in shipbuilding. We are no longer that. In fact, our shipbuilding capability has been exceeded by China, certainly, and several other nations are preferred for most shipbuilding requirements, notably the Dutch, Germans, Koreans, and Japanese, and several others. The U.S. Navy has failed in its most fundamental requirement, that of maintaining the United States, alone among great powers astride both Pacific and Atlantic, as the preeminent sea power nation on Earth. It will take a fundamental breakdown and rebuilding of the entire Department of Defense to correct this immense weakness in our national defense. Wasting money in the name of national security has failed. We need to do better.
Thanks for listening today. If you want to help the show, please share today's episode on any social media sites you can. Check out the War 102 Buzzsprout website for more information and to send me a message. And, of course, my thanks to the subscribers who help keep the show going. Hope you all join me next week. See you soon.